Okay, and joining me now, just like we said at the beginning, Mr. Robert Salas, legend in this field. So happy you could come on today as a guest on UAP Weekly. Thanks for joining me here.
Happy to be here, Stephen. Thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to have you. So there's a lot that I would like to cover with you. So we'll try to get to as much as we can today. First thing I want to ask you is kind of what we saw recently with the congressional hearings with David Grush, David Fravor, and Ryan Graves in front of Congress, all under oath, saying, the big statements that they made, historic day really for guys of that stature to come out and talk like that under oath for the country and the world to see. I wanted to get your initial thoughts from that day. If you can kind of just give your reaction, what your thoughts were after seeing that testimony.
Well, I really anticipated their testimony. I was happy to see it. It's a open hearing, televised to the country by, like you say, three very credible witnesses. Just off the top of my head, I was really impressed with all of them. How explicit they made their statements. For example, David Fravor was encountered the UFO very close. Uh, he stated a couple of things pretty important. Number one, uh, there we have no aircraft or object that can do what he saw this thing do. It took off right in front of his eyes at very high speeds. It was actually tracked on radar and went to their cap point or their rendezvous point for the mission, uh, which was about 60 miles away in less than a minute.
Hmm.
So that's got to be like at least 3,600 miles per hour. Um, so that was pretty significant. He also said that he's disappointed that he wasn't properly debriefed on this by anyone in his command. It was basically hushed up. Um, and of course, um, let's see, David Grush
Mhm.
also said essentially the same thing that uh, he's actually been, uh, you know, not cooperated with, and he's been threatened by
Mm.
people in his command. They don't want any of this stuff released. And it goes to the issue of what I've been talking about for many years, and that is I think there's a well-established cabal or secrecy group within government that's really working hard to keep these secrets.
Yeah, and I think it's important to kind of make that point because, a lot of the things that were talked about during that hearing were, as of pretty recent. Probably the latest thing that was talked about, or I guess, maybe the furthest thing away was the Tic Tac from the Nimitz. That's 2004. That's almost 20 years ago. But,
Yeah.
just going back to your incident, which we'll get to later, the Malmstrom incident, or even going back to some of the things, we heard about with like Operation High Jump, some of the stories coming from there post World War II with Admiral Byrd, which that's I think a point that people miss sometimes, that this is something that's been going on well before 2004.
Absolutely. Uh, Mr. Graves talked about the problems with air safety. I understand that completely, but there have been reports going back at least, in 1950, where during the big sighting over Washington, D.C.,
Mm,
many of the pilots that encountered these aircraft or these objects stated that they flew in front of them. They're very aggressive in that respect. But and then in 1957, I've got a website. I'll put a post on that incident. That was an RB-47 incident where a UFO again followed the craft very closely, jumped in front of them, flew across their flight
mm.
uh, line of flight, and on and on. There's plenty Now, I, I I wish that Mr. Graves had pointed out specific incidents where there could have been a serious incident involving UFO too close to the aircraft that caused something to happen. But so far, I haven't heard of an accident or a serious incident, but maybe he has more information on that.
What did you make of the 3 witnesses that ended up showing up there? I mean, look, all upstanding gentlemen, great careers, great resumes, everything like that. I know that, there was talk from Representative Burchett from Tennessee that there was supposed to be 6 whistleblowers that were going to be there. We ended up with the 3
Right.
that we got, which, again, they were great. What did you make of those 3 and why you think maybe more of the other ones didn't come out? Say, why didn't we have 6?
Well, Burchett said essentially that the DoD put a kibosh on those other 3. They either I don't know. I don't want to use the word threatened, but they kept them from testifying by applying pressures in various ways. Again, you got to understand we're talking about highly classified information. Um, the 3 that did come forward, uh, again, the issue that Graves brought up is an important one. It's aircraft safety,
Hmm.
both civilian and military. However, uh, uh, the national security issue, I could have provided some pretty good information. I've been studying this for over 30 years, well, almost 30 years. Uh, and I've got a lot of information that I've accumulated about UFOs in association with nuclear weapons facilities.
I was
I've
actually
written
about to ask you that. I was gonna say, did they reach out to you at all? And if not, why didn't they? Because it seems like, I mean, you could have given a lot of information that would have been pretty useful on that day.
I think so. They did not reach out, much to my chagrin, because I made a strong effort to put my name forward. I actually wrote and telephoned their offices many, many times. I had other people do the same in supporting, uh, my testimony. But I was never contacted by any of them. The reason I think, and I'm just speculating here, is because this is such a volatile issue. The fact that these objects were able to disable nuclear weapons, and they haven't found an answer for that. They didn't want to have this such an explosive issue at this time. Now, something I might be invited in the future if the Senate has a hearing, which I anticipate they will. Um, but again, I don't think they have the answers, and so they're hesitant to present this to the American public.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think there will be more hearings, and hopefully they, include you in at least one of those that are coming up. I think it would be very beneficial for a lot of people. Robert Salas, you mentioned, a couple of the books actually that you've written in with UAPs and the nuclear puzzle, unidentified, the UFO phenomenon, and I say that because, well, number one, they're great. So if if you haven't read them, I think everybody could find a little piece of information in there that they might find helpful or very interesting. But you wrote those, based off of all the experience you've had in this field, and especially going back to Malmstrom Air Force Base in 1967, March of 1967. That's where this kind of all began for you, right? Was that night when these UFOs, these UAPs came over the base, in case anybody's not familiar with the story, and everything got shut down.
Well, the missiles were disabled. We in the capsule, we were underground 60 feet. There was no impact on us as far as power, loss of power, and the missiles didn't lose power at any time, and there was no damage to the missiles. I want to emphasize that. What happened was they were able to send, by they, I mean the objects, were able to send signals to each of the 10 missiles separately to upset the guidance system. and it was simply an upset of a level platform we use for the inertial or gyroscopic guidance system that we had. Um, and that's what shut them down because uh, it's a mm, very sensitive system that we had to go through in order to target these missiles. And if the targeting system or the guidance system is somehow tweaked, then it would shut the whole thing down because obviously we don't want to launch where we can't really acquire the target properly. So that's the reason they shut down. There was no damage to the systems at all.
And how long did that last?
That lasted, I'd say, approximately 24 hours. We had immediately got maintenance crews out there to retarget the missiles and set it up again. And so, over a span of, I'd say, 24 hours, it took to get all the missiles back up on alert status.
Now, I know you've answered this question before, but I'll ask it for anybody who hasn't heard your answer. Given the time, 1967, why wouldn't this have been the Russians? Why wouldn't it have been one of our adversaries that could have, disabled our ICBMs like that night?
First of all, uh, we had a warning system, NORAD, North American Air Defense, which would have tracked any object heading for the U.S. What this object did, like I said, was pretty much some of the things that Mr. Fravor, I'm sorry, Commander Fravor stated was they were able to fly very fast, stop on a dime, reverse course, make 90-degree turns, no engine noise, um, and we had nothing in our inventory then or now that could do something like that. This was reported, these words, operational abilities of these things were reported to me directly by my security guard, main guard upstairs. They're the same kinds of words you hear today by pilots that have seen these things. Um, no, we had nothing in our inventory. And again, I was in the Air Force and then later worked for Federal Aviation Administration for 22 years. And I can assure you, we had no aircraft that could do anything like what it did. Uh, so then, like I said, it hovered silently and sent signals separately to each of the 10 missiles. And this didn't happen just once in my incident. This happened in 1966 at Minot Air Force Base. David Schindele has spoken about that. He's also given his testimony to Arrow, as I have.
Mm.
And then in my case, there was an incident 8 days earlier at Malmstrom. Walter Fiegel, Colonel Fiegel, retired, is witness to that, and his commander, and the same thing happened there. UFO came over the facilities and shut the missiles down within seconds. So within the span of 6 months, within the span of 6 months, we lost 30 ICBMs or nuclear missiles during UFO encounters.
Why do you think that is, Robert Salas? Why is that something that is being targeted? Not only then, but also now. I mean, you hear about, nuclear submarines with swarms of UAPs around them, or just in general. I mean, even going back, missile tests from Big Sur. There's all these stories throughout the decades of these objects being interested enough in our nuclear capability, our weaponry, to basically, disable them. What is what
Yeah,
why the interest there?
I'm gonna refer you to my website, spiralgalaxy.org. Anybody can go there, and if you go to, let's see, I've got UFOs and nukes
Mhm.
in 2021, October of 2021. I and other witnesses, I mentioned David Shindeli, and there's also Robert Jacobs. Uh, that was the incident in Vandenberg Air Force Base. If you go there, you'll see history of UFO encounters over nuclear weapons facilities, uh, spanning from 1945 to almost the present day.
Mm,
Uh, Now, your question, why are they doing this? To me, I think it's obvious. And I've thought this for a long time. Is they're simply reminding us of the possibility of complete annihilation of our civilization, our planet, if we get involved in a nuclear war. Um, I go into great detail in my books on how this current policy of nuclear deterrence, which means having a superior number of nuclear weapons over any enemy, has simply caused the world to be more dangerous and more susceptible to nuclear war because other countries have developed their own nuclear weapons. So we have 9 countries now. Two of those countries, India and Pakistan, are currently at war with each other. They could use them at any time.
mm,
Russia has threatened to use nukes in the Ukrainian war right now. We in the U.S. have tried to use nukes or could have used nukes in other wars,
mm.
the Korean War and also the Vietnam War. Uh, both times, our military commanders asked the president if they could use nuclear weapons. So
Mm.
uh, I know it's a horrendous thing to think about, but it is a very real risk, even today, that we could get ourselves into a nuclear war. And so, again, in answer to your question, I think these beings, these advanced civilizations that are visiting us, are simply warning us to rid ourselves of nuclear weapons, and that's my ultimate goal, to see if we can get started on abolishing all nuclear weapons. And I think it's possible to do that.
Yeah, it's a nice goal to have, for sure. Can be a safer place. Well, how were you met, Robert, when it came to these things, these incidents that we're talking about here, as compared to present day with someone like David Grush, where he's met with, still, skepticism here in 2023, but then you have a congressional hearing where he is essentially the main witness. Compare that to how you were met when you first started talking about your experiences.
Well, uh, uh, first of all, my first disclosure was to the Great Falls Tribune.
Hmm,
I walked into their office and got a hold of the editor and told my story. And of course, he listened carefully, but he wanted to do some research, etc. So, of course, I was met with incredulity, but I kept at it. I went on radio shows, TV shows, and uh, finally, with the help of Robert Hastings, who wrote the book UFOs and Nukes, we started doing press conferences in Washington, D.C. Also, with the help of Stephen Bassett. I once mentioned Stephen Bassett brought me in as a witness, and during his press conferences in Washington, D.C. And at times we were met with, of course, both skepticism, but we did get um, media coverage. And in the case of the presentation we made in 2013 in Washington, D.C. at the Citizens Hearing on Disclosure, we got a lot of media coverage,
right.
international coverage, and we got the attention of some of the Congress people. Of course, they called me a nut, but still, we got attention. Uh, uh, and then what happens is the media gets distracted, and 3 days later, nothing. It's like the media had amnesia, forgot all about it. Uh, Today, we're seeing the same kind of thing. We are getting some TV coverage. However, it's not in depth. It's, you know, 30-second sound bites here and there.
Right.
So I think the media is responsible for the fact that more this isn't given more attention in the government and around the world. So I'd like to call them to, pay more attention, bring more people in, talk about this in more in depth.
I'm with you on that. And one thing that they really haven't brought up, which I feel like it's a big deal, is this new UAP amendment that Senator Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, I think it's fair to highlight his title there because that's someone who is in a real position of power to where now he came out and made it a point to add in this new UAP amendment, they're calling it, in the National Defense Authorization Act of 2024. So when something like that happens, you would think, oh, wow, the Senate Majority Leader is having this UAP amendment put in. That might be a top headline. And you don't hear that much about it. But it is a big deal, right? Am I wrong about that?
No, you're right. It is a big deal. In fact, the title of that amendment is called the UAP Disclosure Act of
Mm,
2023. That's the official title. Uh, it would establish the presumption that all such records be disclosed to the public. Although later on, of course, they talk about unless it affects national security, which that's a big box. How do you
yeah,
define what could affect national security? So there's a lot of leeway in it. It does, however, state that there is credible evidence and testimony in U.S. government records that have not been disclosed to the public. So essentially, it's admitting this document, this amendment is admitting that there's been an ongoing cover up by the government.
right.
Uh, it establishes the fact that, let's see, establishes a controlled disclosure campaign. I'm reading from notes that I took. I'm sorry.
No,
Um,
that's yeah.
uh,
That's
uh,
pretty much the
but
gist of it. I mean, and I think like you said too, it's the main point in that is they're almost acknowledging without actually saying it, but they're acknowledging that there has been stuff that's covered up, which they've denied for decades.
exactly, exactly. Uh, and so it's basically stating that there are legacy programs where commercial industry has been involved, private sector, um, non-governmental agencies have been involved in the cover-up. And there are all these records, the UAP records, outstanding that they are demanding basically through this amendment that these be turned over to the government. Now, the big question I have is, while all this is well and good, what's the government going to do with this information? Are they going to disclose to the public, or are they going to continue um, and say, well, we can't release some of this stuff; it's too explosive, like in my case, um, and keep it hidden like they have for decades? You know, Words are fine. I applaud Senator Schumer, Senator Rubio, and others that put this out. Senator Gillibrand, of course. Uh, but when it comes right down to it, and David Grush verified this, there's still an ongoing effort to maintain these secrets, and it's going to be very, very, very difficult to unlock them, even with amendments like this.
And I can't help but to wonder, and I'm sure you've wondered the same thing. So I'll ask you, why now? I think it's the question that keeps going through my head. Why now, after all this time, is Congress and the Senate so seemingly suddenly interested in this conversation, in this, in these questions of other life and this, otherworldly technology? Why now does it seem like they really want to jump on the ball here and bring about some type of disclosure?
Well, I think you saw the frustration in Congressman Burchett. In the press conferences he's given, he's shown a lot of frustration that we're not getting the answers. Um, So I think this has come to a head partly because of, again, the 30-year effort, not only myself, but many others have done to get the word out through these conferences. Uh, and it just kind of built up into the fact that the evidence is overwhelming,
Mm,
overwhelming by a multitude of people, including astronauts. I just finished reading a book by Gordon Cooper,
mm.
who had his own incidents, and of course, Edgar Mitchell and others have come forward. The evidence is simply overwhelming that we have got to deal with this phenomenon. Uh, and of course, after the release of the Tic Tac videos, that kind of kicked it open to much more interest by Congress. So, uh, but still, uh, while we've had the testimony of Grush and Fravor and Graves, um, uh, there is still a lot of questions. For example, Grush has got information, but he still can't get into a skiff to
Right.
tell congressmen what they want to know. So, like I said, it's going to be an ongoing battle. And what people are, again, if you go to my website, I wrote a paper called Extreme and Excessive Secrecy.
Mhm.
You'll find it there, but it talks about um, the security system is broken, seriously broken. Um, People that are supposed to report on classified systems and procedures are not reporting. There's a lot of things wrong with how we keep the secrets, and that's how I think the cabal wants it. They want to mess secrecy, so they're going to have to. The government is going to have to figure out how to fix that in order to make an amendment like the Schumer amendment work.
I'm curious, Robert, who do you think is or what is involved in the cabal that's, has been talked about a lot that you've brought up? Is it private companies? Is a mix of things? Is it a private companies, like Lockheed or their division of Skunk Works, Northrop Grumman, a lot of these Boeing, a lot of these companies that Raytheon, another name that a lot of people bring up. Is it strictly in the private sector, or do you think it's a mix of private sector and, you know, big government somewhere, top generals, things like that, Pentagon officials?
Well, I think it's individuals within government and outside of government, like you mentioned, within some of the industry, aerospace industry companies that have benefited from retrievals and back engineering and producing products based on the, this advanced technology that they've been able to glean from these studies of retrievals. Uh, this is a very, let's say, lucrative
Mm,
enterprise that the cabal has going. People are making money, a lot of money. They're able to barter these secrets with other countries, other people in other countries that are cooperating with the cabal, I'll say. There's plenty of evidence of that. Um, and so secrets are powerful. They're powerful political tools and lucrative. There's money to be made here. So I'm sure part of the reason the cabal is keeping the secrets is because there have been
mm.
crimes committed, as David Grush pointed out, uh, including the severe way they treat potential whistleblowers. Well, we won't get into that, but it's
Mm.
I think Grush pointed out a couple of pretty horrible things that might have happened to
Yeah.
people. Yeah.
What type of, I guess, and if you can't get into it, then by all means, but this is just my curiosity, um, my curiosity kind of taking over here. What kind of, I guess, stories, experiences have you come across where maybe have sent a shudder down your spine where someone says, "Hey, this company
Mhm.
X here is doing something like this, and this is what I've heard about it."
Well, excuse me.
Mhm.
Um, I, uh, in general, I try to tell the public everything I know. There are a few things I'm keeping to myself right now because of protection of individuals. Um, but for the in the main, I disclose most everything I know. Like I said, I've written two or three books now, and I've been talking 15 countries all over the world in the United States for nearly 30 years. I've talked about a lot of my own personal experiences,
Mm.
but I guess I don't know how to answer your question. I'm not trying to hide anything uh, major major importance.
Yeah, I guess you've been through a lot. I think is the main point, and you've seen a lot and you've heard a lot, and that's why it's so important to have you out and speaking about these things, Robert. And I really hope that when we do have another hearing, which I think we will, from all indications anyway, unless Congress is stonewalled again, um, I think it's important for them to try to get you out there and get you involved because you've seen a lot of this for a long time now, and there's a lot of information that you can give, quite frankly.
Well, pardon me. Even if I am not invited to speak at a public hearing, like I said, I have uh, began the process of putting a lot of information on my website. So
Mhm.
anybody that wants to see the evidence I've got for my case, the other cases that I mentioned, and new cases which maybe people aren't aware of, they'll all go there. And so I'm reporting to the public. And so one thing we should understand is disclosure is not just about the government telling what they know, but it's about witnesses coming forward and telling what they know. We do have a whistleblower act now. Arrow is interviewing people and will continue to interview people. Uh, in my case, I've got the entire interview on tape
Mm.
over 2 hours, and I'm open, as far as I'm concerned, open to releasing any or all of that. Uh, um, so uh, we, the public, we, the witnesses out there, can do our own disclosure. Whether or not the government recognizes it, um, it's really, I think this is going to be a political issue
Mm.
in the coming election. Um, People have to demand answers of their politicians. These people work for us, uh, not for their own reelection per se, but that's what they're trying to do. They try to uh, keep a low profile on subjects that they have difficulty dealing with. But it's up to us to keep pressing our representatives, keep on your congressmen, senators, ask them about these things, keep talking about it, and that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah. No, it's a
You
good way to put it, and I wanna mention too, you mentioned your website, it's, spiralgalaxy.org. That's, Robert's website. You can go there. There's a lot of great resources on there and tools and information about, the books that you've come out with, about, the Malmstrom files on there, so there's a lot of good info on
right.
spiralgalaxy.org. You mentioned the presidents, Robert, and actually I had this question in the back of my head, so I'll ask it. In a few more minutes, if I know you're very gracious with your time, I appreciate it, and we'll wrap up here soon for you. But I'm wondering, have you heard anything about presidents being involved with this secrecy? Because there's so many stories that I've just heard about where the this secret government, if you will, the cabal, I've heard that they try to keep some presidents out of the loop because they look at them as like part-time employees almost, right?
Mhm.
Is that your experience, or have you heard about some presidents kind of being in the know?
Well, what I do know is President Truman acknowledged that he was being briefed on UFOs. If you Google that, you can find it on the web. Actual video of President Truman
Mhm.
stating, he was briefed on UFOs. But after Truman, I think they established, well, probably MJ-12. You probably heard of that, and established this group, a secret group, if you will, that was confirmed by Wilbert Smith, the Canadian engineer, that there was a secret group studying this subject. And after that, I think this secret group decided not to keep the president up to date or informed on this because, of course, it's a temporary job for a president, and they don't want presidents after they retire talking about this. So I think they've made a conscious effort not to brief presidents. I know there's been theories about John F.
Mm.
Kennedy being, looking into it. Clinton looked into it. So did Jimmy Carter. Looked into this, and they were stonewalled. uh, we wrote a letter to Barack Obama, and he came back, or his scientific advisor came back and stated there's no evidence to show that we've been visited by extraterrestrials, blah, blah, blah. So
Hmm.
I think he was kept in the dark, and as every president since Truman, probably.
Is that the secret group that we talk about? I know some people are gonna wonder, so I'll ask the question. Is that the Majestic 12 that we're referring to?
Majestic 12 was the beginning, I think, of this secret group. There was a letter written to a couple of letters that were verified about Majestic 12 by Stanton Friedman, who I hold in high respect. I knew Stanton personally. He did a lot of research and validating the fact that this Majestic 12 group existed, uh, headed by Vannevar Bush, um, who was really the top scientist during World War II in the government. Uh, there are records of people like Einstein and Oppenheimer that visited the crash site of Roswell
Mhm.
in 1947, supporting witnesses to that. So, yeah, I think that was the beginning of this secret group.
Hmm. And a couple more things here, Robert. I'm wondering, through everything that you've gone through with this subject and trying to get the word out there and your own experiences, do you feel like this is the closest to some type of disclosure that we've had? Or, or people getting their hopes up?
I think people should get their hopes up. Yeah, this is the closest we've come. Um, and I think it can't be turned around now. I think there are too many uh, government officials and whistleblowers coming forward that are highly, highly interested in this subject. And I think we're on the cusp of getting more disclosure. The key, I think, again, is to have open hearings, and the
Mm.
Senate. I sure hope they do have open hearings, even if I'm not invited. It's important you get witnesses in front of the public telling these stories because it's really the public that's going to push this wide open. Um, these Congress people, like I said, are historically weak-kneed when it
Mm.
comes to these kinds of things. It's really the public pushing forward that's going to break things open, and I think we can hope for that now.
Yeah, I think that's really well put because it does feel like to me too, and I agree with you. It 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 almost feels like there's a shift that's kind of taking place or has taken place, and I think, some of the analogies that are used, like, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. It feels like we're kind of in that moment, right?
I agree. I think so.
So I'll get you out of here on this, Robert. I wanted to play a little name association game with you, if you don't mind. If you don't want to give a comment, or even if you're not familiar with the name, then that's fine. But I wanted to just curious when I throw out a name to you, what's some of the first things that come to your mind? Is that okay?
You can try, but I may have no comment.
That's fine. That's fine. We'll give it a shot. First name I have here, Jeremy Corbell.
No comment.
All right. In a good way or a bad way?
No comment.
Okay. George Knapp,
No comment.
Lou Elizondo,
No comment.
David Grush.
Uh, I think he's a good witness. I believed him. I think he's going to make some waves. So
Okay. John Lear.
fantastic. John Lear, the aviation.
Mhm.
Uh, yeah, actually, I think he's a valid witness. Actually, I worked on his aircraft, the Learjet, not the Learjet. It was a composite of the Learjet, composite materials when I was with FAA.
Yeah, for those who aren't familiar with him, I know that might be a little unfamiliar for some people, but he's the son. I mean, he's part of Learjet, but he passed away last year, but he had some incredible claims, talked about, you know, Roswell, talked about Area 52, talked about these runways opening up in the middle of the desert. He had a lot of
Mhm.
incredible claims and some things that actually people look back on now from interviews like in the mid 90s and they're like, wait a minute, we're hearing about this now. So it's pretty interesting. If someone's not familiar with John Lear, I say it's worth your time to look him up.
Yeah, people don't remember Stearman. He produced or developed one of the initial trainers. I think prior to World War II, but he had his own UFO experience.
Hmm. Dr. Stephen Greer,
No comment.
Bob Lazar.
No comment.
Well, last one. I think you'll have a comment on this one. Robert Salas.
A guy who's trying to get the word out. And I'm going to keep pushing.
Good. That's great. All right. I want to press just a little bit. Do you find Bob Lazar to be um, reputable, truthful? Do you find him to be somebody that should be taken seriously?
Let me just say, I find uh, that there is good evidence, and I'm convinced that we have uh, non-human bodies or entities, or have had them. We have developed uh, uh, machines that attempt to simulate the flight characteristics of UFOs developed from recovered craft. I'm convinced of those two things, and those are the kinds of things Lazar talks about. Uh, I don't know Mr. Lazar. I've never talked to him, so that's one reason I have no comment. It's not that I don't believe him. In fact, um, I'm, like I said, in agreement with some of the things he stated.
Okay. Well, Robert Salas, thank you again so much. It's really been awesome talking to you. I've always been fascinated personally by your story, by your experiences. So, just for me, it's an honor. It's a pleasure to have you on here for UAP Weekly and talk about this subject.
Thank you, Stephen. I really appreciate the opportunity, and like I said, I'll just keep on talking.
Absolutely. Be happy to have you on again as things continue to develop, if you like.
Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Thank,
Robert Salas joining us here on UAP Weekly. Thank you.
thank you.